Hello, in this tutorial we're going to go through some of the game options that are available when you set up a scenario. So just so you know, go to campaign, you get very little options. What you can do is generally just change the difficulty. All this will do is effectively change, if you go back to sandbox, so all that will do, changing the difficulty, changes these three options to all hard, very hard, easy, very easy. That's all you can really change in the campaigns. So I'm going to start with startup. So we're going to game option startup. So military difficulty. If you change this, it either makes the AI a bit smarter, gives them a bit more of a boost to the military efficiency. So you'll see on very hard difficulty, AI does a lot more amphibious assaults, whereas on very easy, they tend to be a bit more passive. On economic difficulty, if you set that to be harder, it means that people tend to buy less, so your economy tends to struggle a bit more. Whereas on very easy, people tend to buy a lot more, and things are a bit more forgiving. Diplomatic difficulty, so very hard, tends to push the AI towards each other, and more against the player. Deals become a bit more difficult to get, whereas on very easy, it's the opposite, where the AI tends to be a bit more forgiving of you, and things are much easier to buy. So it'll probably cost you less to buy a particular technology or a unit design. So, resources. So these are the starting resources. Although they do also sort of bump production a little bit, but mainly it's the starting resources. Initial funds. So basically you can have the starting treasury, so you can have high, default. The default just takes whatever's set in the CVP file. Low or no new bonds, which basically bans anyone from having loans, which I prefer. Keeps the AI a bit smarter. Random events, so these are just random pop-up messages. Generally of, things like, oh, you've gained such and such stock, or you've lost such and such stock, or some extra money, things like that. I don't really care about these, to be honest, generally, because it doesn't really make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. So, global AI stance. So default just takes it, however the scenario was set up. Unpredictable does, like it says, it does a lot of random things, sets the AI, its priorities a bit different. Aggressive tends to send the AI very much against the player and against each other AIs that it doesn't particularly like. Defensive tends to put the AI into a lot of defensive alliances, but very rarely do they go on an offensive war. Passive just gets them to sit there. I tend to just leave this on default by the scenarios it was made. You can give the AI cheats. So as you can see, sets all AI players to build faster and less time overall. And you give them a bonus. People ask for this over the years. I don't do it, so I just leave it as none. Scheduled game end. If you want a very limited time game, you can set it to this, upon which the game would literally end. You can tick allied victories. So this sets the actual end goal of the scenario. So if you don't have this ticked, you basically have to conquer everyone and everything. Whereas if you have allied victories, as long as it's your alliance basically. So as long as you and you're allied to everybody at the end, who's remaining, win the scenario. Start game event national debt. So for a lot of the modern starts, nations have a huge amount of debt. To tick this, you have no debt, which obviously removes all the interest payments you have as well, which will save you a load of money for your economy. Critical international opinion. So the AI tends to be a lot more critical of you. Okay, it's not really a great description, but effectively, if you do an action, instead of being quite forgiving and just kind of looking the other way, so let's say you invade a country, international opinion will kind of be against you if you do this, or against any of the AIs if they do that kind of thing. Infection level, we'll leave this off because it's not used yet. It's part of the global outbreak, so just leave it at none for now. But now we'll go on to the gameplay tab. So we've got approval effects. So this is effectively, bonuses you get from having high approval. So if you have no approval effects, there won't be any bonuses for having a high approval. There won't be any drawbacks though for having low approval. The higher you turn this, the more and more you get. So having a much higher approval rating will give you much bigger bonuses. So if you're playing like a democracy, for example, the higher the approval rating, the higher production, the higher consumption of goods, which obviously means more money because you're taxing and making a profit on these. But firstly, if you have really low approval rating, you're far more likely to revolt. If you've got sort of like sub-regions annexed, they're more likely to kind of just tear off and make their own country. Nuclear weapon penalties. So this is basically whether you'll suffer morale drop from using nuclear weapons. You set it high, pretty much most of your units may start to surrender straight away until military approval goes back up. Low nuclear weapons, simple. If you untick it, you can't use nuclear weapons. They won't be available to build in the game. Units eliminated when region falls. So, if you invade a country, if you have this box ticked, instead of when they fall, any remaining units falling into basically join your become part of your army now. If you have units eliminated when region falls ticked, any units that the opposing nation has left will just magically disappear, will no longer exist, and that obviously also works for the AI. Start game with units, so basically just ignores any orbats that have been created in the background, so literally no one will start with any units, not unit designs. They'll have unit design stuff, but they won't have any actual physical units. You tick that box. Unit trades arrive instantly, so basically what this does, if you have it ticked, instead of when you sell a unit to another nation, it appearing in your nation and having to physically travel to the other nation, it'll just magically teleport basically to their country, to a nearby barracks to their capital, or to the capital itself if they don't have a barracks or an airfield or a seaport. But they won't be usable instantly, or rather they will be usable instantly, but they'll only have a very limited health level. They'll transfer the unit, it'll transfer it with like 50% strength, but it'll also transfer the military goods needed to bring it back up to full strength. I use this sometimes because it works quite well for helicopters, although it can be a bit cheesy to do. So, limit domestic approval effects, so this turns off things like rebellions and whatnot if you tick it. Same with the limited military approval effects, you're not going to have a coup, effectively, if your military rating's too low. And you won't have units surrendering constantly if your military approval's too low, if you tick this box. Low government change, doesn't really do much, but this is if you lose your election, it lets you keep playing on. So I just leave it ticked, because I like playing on, sometimes I end up as a dictatorship. Fog of war. So this obviously, if you have it ticked like I have, then you can only see what the spotting distance sees, what your towns will see. You can't obviously see units deep inside of a foreign country unless you've got a spy plane or recon satellites. That just basically turns it on and off. Enhanced spotting basically bumps the ranges. I think it's about 50% for the spotting ranges if you have it ticked. If you don't have it ticked, it drops the range down. Enhanced ranges is very similar, but it's actually the attack range. So if you untick it, units will have about 50% less attack range. Which affects more artillery and sort of battleships and whatnot more than anything. Disable unit banking. So, as the tooltip, if I can get the tooltip up. Units will turn inside of their current hex. That's what it does. It basically stops them doing like a multi-hex sort of turn if you tick it. It's more of a personal thing if you want that on or off. So now we'll move on to the systems tab. So, we've got colonies keep military complexes. So, what this does is if you tick it and you build a military complex or for like an airfield or something inside of a colony, normally that hex would transfer to your native territory. if you have that ticked, what it will do, it will make the colony still keep it, which means the colony will be building it, they will pay for it and they will build it. Whereas if the hex transfers, because you don't have this ticked, you have to pay for it and build it yourself. Loyalty penalties to supply and line of sight. So if you have that ticked, basically the maximum sort of supply and production capability you will have from non-loyal territory is about 66%. It also reduces the line of sight as well somewhat. If you turn that off, basically any land you conquer acts as if it was your own land. There's no supply penalties, no line of sight penalties to actually occupying it. So yeah, it obviously represents people not being happy if you have it ticked, being occupied by your own country. Electricity sales, that's simple. If you have it ticked, you can sell electricity abroad. If you don't, you can't sell it abroad. Same, but likewise, you can also buy it in. So up to you whether you want to have that on. It's kind of more realistic in the modern starts, where a lot of countries now tend to sell electricity between each other, whereas in like 36 start, it's very rare for grids to be interconnected between countries, even between cities, to be fair. So that's more of a personal choice. Third-party relation effects. So basically, this affects if I was to declare war on one other country, if I had that unticked, their allies wouldn't really care. They wouldn't have any relationship changes with us. But if I leave it ticked, if I declare war on their ally, they'll not like me. That's simply what it does. It just, whether third parties, when you do actions between countries have actions between them, whether they affect relationships with their allies and whatnot. The weather system, that's very simple. There's a weather system that overlays on the game. This actually has quite a bit of an effect, especially in the northern hemisphere and very southern hemisphere, because there's things like the snow, there's rain, which affects your ability to attack, supply, whatnot. So trying to invade Russia in winter with the weather system on will actually be a bit of a crawl, because you'll struggle to get supply to push. Units will lose efficiency because of the weather. So again, it's a personal choice. It keeps things interesting. Does mean you have to be think a bit more about when you attack. Means, like I say, if you're trying to invade Russia in winter, it may not end well for you, which is, to be fair, historical. Got spheres of influence system. So in some sandboxes, so like the 1914 and the 1936 starts, you have two different spheres. So basically, have like in 1936, you have the Allies and the Axis. This is basically used for like a sphere victory setup, but it also kind of drag nations towards each of the sort of like the leaders of the faction, which helps them, gives diplomatic boosts to various different countries, effectively trying to get allies with Britain. I think Britain's the faction leader in the Allies, or the Axis is Germany. Battle of the Atlantic. So with this ticked, if you're at war with the UK and you send ships into the North Atlantic, your ships will automatically attack invisible targets, which are supposed to represent the merchant marine going across the Atlantic. The only annoying part about this is it only affects Britain, and like I say, you just have to send ships into the North Atlantic itself, the actual North Atlantic theatre. Again, it's a personal preference. If you're playing as Britain, you won't have to deal with the challenge of trying to keep the North Atlantic clear of ships and submarines. Fixed capitals is it's very simple. If it's ticked, you can't move your capital. If it's unticked, you can move your capital. If you want to move it far away from where it started, less likely to be captured, because obviously if your capital's captured, there's a bit of a drawback to that. You sort of lose military approval, domestic approval, whatnot. Use rail transport. So this being ticked allows units to basically convert into trains, go down train lines, and be able to get from point A to B without using any supply. And at a fixed speed. Obviously, depends on what tech of the train techs you have. actually means that sort of like leg units can move really quick, because otherwise they'd be moving at 6 kilometers an hour, but they can move at whatever the train speed is. But again, they can't attack from the trains. Sanction system, this brings in the global sanctioning system. So this enables countries to be sanctioned, which can push up prices, make it a bit more difficult for them to import and export because of this, or eventually just get locked out of the world market altogether, depending on your difficulty level. Depends on where this sort of percentage of world nations, so they have to sanction you before you get banned from the world market effectively. Merchant marine system. So this is ticked. You have the automatically made merchant marines. So if you try to send a unit abroad, over the sea rather, it'll just generate a new merchant marine. If you don't have that ticked, you have to create supply ships of your own. Any sort of transport ship. I'll cover this in another tutorial. And that lets you go. Then you have to use those, and it'll request those to go anywhere. Pick them up and move them around. So this kind of prevents you from just spamming like 2,000 units abroad, them all just going into magic merchant marines and turning up at the other shore. Now the bottom one is force-free cache for modding. Most people won't need this, but simply if you tick it and you press start, so I'll just do it like this, it'll rebuild the cache, which it's more for modding. If you were modding the scenario, it'd be a lot more useful. So you can turn up the general difficulty here, change the world volatility. So this is the higher you set it, the more likely wars are to happen, because it sharpens relations. So anybody, if you set it the higher it goes, if you like somebody, you like them more. If you hate them more, and that's the same for all the AI. So there tend to be a lot more wars. If you stick to very high, tend to get like pretty much constant wars. You'll see the wars just happening all the time. See my French campaign in the modern start. I set it to medium, and you can see there's quite a few more wars. Not silly amount of wars, but wars that are kind of nearly breaking out in reality, but wouldn't generally break out because the consequences would be too high. But when you set it to medium, they don't care about this anymore. Now the other thing to cover is the victory missions, which there are 3. So complete is basically you have to conquer everybody, and depending on whether you've got allied victories ticked, it's whether it's just you left or whether it's you plus your allies. Capital, so if you take the enemy's capital, they will fall straight away and you will conquer them. And capture is to capture a certain unit or destroy it. They can sort of move this unit around. But that covers all the options for when you set sandbox or a scenario. So I hope this helps you out when you're trying to configure start your game. Just let me know if you've got any questions or any comments. Leave a like, subscribe as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.